Good afternoon. I see 3 interpretation accounts logged in. Is that how you intended for it to be?
This is testing the Spanish channel. That works, thank you.
Hi, Molly. Can you please unmute and do a quick sound check for us?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Hey, Molly, can you hear me from here?
Yes.
Okay, great. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm assuming it should work here as well. Can you hear me clearly with my mask on? Oh,
I can hear you.
oh okay.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get our workshop started this afternoon. Thank you for participating in our public workshop for potential amendments to District Rule 4460, Petroleum Refinery Fence Line Air Monitoring, and District Rule 3200, Petroleum Refinery Community Air Monitoring Fees. Before we begin our workshop, just wanted to read some instructions for Zoom participation. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation via Zoom video and audio teleconference. Before we begin, I would would like to review some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your cell and desk phones. This will ensure that we do not hear any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. Only district staff will be visible via Zoom. Members of the public are asked to unmute themselves when they are recognized to make a public comment. After the presentation, staff will announce the public comment period has opened, and staff will recognize any public attendee who has indicated they wish to speak. On the Zoom video application, please press raise hand button at the bottom of your screen so that you may be recognized to speak, and be sure to unmute yourself. If you are participating by Zoom phone conference, please press *9 to raise your hand so that you may be recognized to speak. Staff will call the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak, and be sure to press *6 to unmute or mute yourself. Written comments can also be sent to webcast@valier.org email address. The mailbox will be monitored during the workshop, and comments received will be read aloud by staff during the public comment period. So thank you for that. Just wanted to let you know the instructions for the Zoom workshop this afternoon. So just wanted to introduce myself. I'm John Klassen. I'm the Director of Air Quality Science. I'm joined by Chai Tao, Program Manager, and Molly Boyette, Air Quality Specialist. This is the third public meeting we've had in the discussions of potential amendments to Rules 4460 and 3200. We had a scoping meeting in February of this year, a first workshop in April, and now here's our second workshop here in June. Ahead of this meeting, we posted draft rules 4460 and 3200 for the amendments to those, as well as guidelines and the presentation. So that is all on our website for you to review and provide comment on. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the workshop and the presentation. So let me jump into the PowerPoint presentation here and just give you a quick overview of what we're going to discuss this afternoon. We're going to provide some background on Assembly Bill 1647 for the Valley and other regions in California, talk about the state provided refinery air monitoring guidance that's been provided for different areas needing to implement AB 1647. We'll talk about the Valley's refineries, current regulations that they fall within, the hotspots program, the emissions inventories for those facilities, and then dive into detail of what we're proposing for the amendments to 4460 and 3200, specifically removing some specific exemptions, requiring refineries to submit their plan according to the Rule 4460 guidelines, and monitoring requirements through site-specific analysis, and then wrap up with some next steps in the public process. So a little bit of background on Assembly Bill 1647. This was signed by the Governor of California on October 8th, 2017, and it requires a number of elements here that we list on the slide. One of them being petroleum refineries needing to develop, install, and operate and maintain a fence line air monitoring system at or near the refineries in accordance with guidance developed by CARB or the local air district. Air districts must also develop, install, and operate and maintain a refinery-related community air monitoring system, and that all this data being collected by the fence line in the community must be made available in real time. Through the district's approach for this, the district adopted Rules 4460 and 3200 in December of 2019 through a public process to implement the requirements of AB 1647 in the San Joaquin Valley. Looking at some of the current requirements for Rule 4460, this is what's currently in place. Then we'll show what we're proposing in our amendments. So currently, what we have in place for Rule 4460 is that refineries must install, operate, and maintain a fence line air monitoring system and make that data collected publicly available in real time. There are exemptions in the current Rule 4460 for refineries that are not currently engaged in refining crude oil. And what we're showing in this table below are the requirements for fence line air monitoring for different capacities of barrels per day refining for each facility type. So at the top of the table, if a facility operates less than 40,000 barrels per day, you see on the right-hand side the different monitoring requirements that are in place right now, the pollutants of sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and different BTEX compounds. For facilities over 40,000 barrels per day, you see a much longer list of pollutants that must be monitored at the fence line. And again, this is what's currently in place for the rule requirements, and we'll show you what we're proposing in the amendments in just a few moments. Currently in Rule 3200, this is what we have in place now, and as mandated by AB 1647, our Rule 3200 recovers the district's costs of developing and maintaining the community air monitoring systems that are required under that Assembly Bill. And this fee approach is based on establishing community air monitoring stations that can measure a variety of different pollutants with a variety of sensors provide that data to the public who are interested in seeing that. So giving you a bit of background now on why are we now proposing amendments to our rules 4460 and 3200. There was a recent Fresno County Superior Court ruling in September of 2021, last fall, that provided additional clarification on the statutory requirements for AB 1647. And out of that ruling, there were a few issues that needed to be addressed within our rules, which is what we're working through in this public process. One of those is removing the exemption for affected petroleum facilities not currently engaged in refining crude oil. We've been discussing that in our workshops along the way, and we'll provide some detail here this afternoon. The other element is reevaluating an additional supporting analysis with respect to the monitoring provisions for refineries that produce less than 40,000 barrels per day. And currently, like I mentioned, the requirements for those types of facilities are 6 pollutants, H2S, SO2, and the BTEX pollutants. So the court ordered that we had to reevaluate those details and provide justification for any changes, which we're going to describe this afternoon. So in response to this court order, like I mentioned, we've been going through a public process throughout this past year and putting together additional technical analysis to support potential amendments to both rules 4460 and 3200. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Molly, who's going to give us some more background on state guidance and the implementation throughout the state for AB 1647.
Thanks, John. So in developing guidance for fence line monitoring, AB 1647 requires that the district take into account monitoring technological capabilities, input from affected parties, and to the extent feasible, the refinery-related guidance prepared by the state, which includes the Refinery Emergency Air Monitoring Assessment Report, or REMAR, prepared by the California Air Resources Board and the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, as well as the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHHA report, titled The Analysis of Refinery Chemical Emissions and Health Effects. Next slide, please. The REMAR provides an inventory of emergency air monitoring assets and capabilities for refineries in California and provides recommendations to improve emergency and routine air monitoring at refineries and in surrounding communities. These recommendations cover air monitoring technology, modeling, and coordination. The REMAR advises that implementing best practices does not imply a one-size-fits-all solution for refinery air monitoring. And recognizing the variability among refineries, implementation of each REMAR recommended strategy must be suited to each facility's size, operations, specific location, and surrounding receptors, keeping in mind the practical limitations of current and emerging technologies and the timeframes necessary for full implementation. Next slide, please. The OEHHA report presents a list of chemicals emitted from California refineries and identifies 18 top candidates for air monitoring, taking into account emission levels and toxicity. Those 18 are shown here. The report also noted that sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and hydrocarbons were the most commonly reported chemicals emitted during refinery incidents. Next slide, please. To make their assessment, OEHHA compiled a list of 188 chemicals emitted from California refineries, including emissions during routine operations and incidents, as well as chemicals that may be rarely emitted. These chemicals were ranked based on the average level of emissions from refineries statewide, their involvement in multiple refinery processes and incidences, and their toxicity weights derived from EPA's inhalation toxicity scores for individual chemicals. From this assessment, OEHHA determined the top 18 candidates for air monitoring. Next slide, please. AB 1647 applies to all petroleum refineries in California, and there are 5 California air districts with refineries in their jurisdiction. The refineries vary in size and processing capacity, as well as operations. This slide lists those refineries by air district and displays the processing capacity of each one. And the chart on the right shows the total crude oil processing capacity within each air district. The San Joaquin Valley is highlighted there in the middle. As you can see, the refineries in the valley are much smaller compared to the refineries in South Coast and Bay Area. Next slide, please. The 5 California air districts with refineries in their jurisdiction have taken different approaches to implement the requirements of AB 1647. Most have adopted a rule with requirements for fence line monitoring, except for San Luis Obispo County, who opted to establish an MOU with the one refinery in their district. This slide shows the pollutants required for monitoring in each of the 5 districts. For comparison, the first column shows OEHHA's top 18 recommended pollutants. The district's current Rule 4460 requires consideration of the same pollutants as South Coast Rule for refineries with a processing capacity above 40,000 barrels per day. However, the district's rule includes monitoring requirements for facilities with a capacity of less than 40,000 barrels per day, while South Coast exempts facilities of that size. Bay Area requires refineries to monitor a minimum of VTEX, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide, and requires consideration of several other compounds. San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, with just one refinery each, developed smaller lists of pollutants more specific to their facilities. And as marked in the table, some refineries are allowed to exclude certain pollutants from monitoring with sufficient justification. And so what the refineries are actually monitoring may look a little bit different. Next slide, please. So this table shows what the refineries in California actually identified for monitoring at their fence lines. The second column restates the pollutants required for monitoring by each district, which we went over in the previous slide. Then the table shows each refinery subject to monitoring requirements within each district, their processing capacity, and what pollutants they actually identified for monitoring in their plans. The refineries in South Coast, all above 40,000 barrels per day, generally elected to monitor the full list of pollutants, except for hydrogen fluoride where it is not used. Bay Area refineries provided justification in their plans to exclude certain pollutants from monitoring or to use a surrogate. And San Joaquin Valley, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara refineries all identified the pollutants that were required of them. Next slide, please. There are 4 facilities in the San Joaquin Valley that are classified as petroleum refineries, all located in Bakersfield. Alon and Tricor are not currently refining crude oil, and so they are exempt from the current rule. However, Alon does have real-time fence line monitoring in place as a condition of a county use permit, and they are monitoring ammonia, H2S, and hydrocarbons. The 2 refineries subject to current monitoring requirements, Kern Oil and San Joaquin Refining, have current monitoring plans that identify VTEX, H2S, and SO2 for monitoring as required in the current rule. Next slide, please. In addition to the fence line and community monitoring rules, refineries are subject to multiple district rules that have been shown to be the most stringent rules feasible for implementation. They are also subject to a variety of performance standards under local, state, and federal regulations to reduce emissions of air pollutants. These include requirements for continuous monitoring for leaks, ongoing reporting, and regular district inspections to ensure compliance. New and modified equipment at refineries also must meet various federal new source performance standards, which are shown here and include standards for storage vessels, gasoline terminals, wastewater systems, and equipment leaks. Next slide, please. The numerous district rules that may apply to petroleum refineries are shown here. And these include the new and modified stationary source review rule, visible emissions and nuisance rules, flare minimization requirements, and other rules that include NOx emission limits, sulfur emission control requirements, and leak detection and repair requirements. Next slide, please. Refineries in California are also subject to the Air Toxics Hotspots Act under Assembly Bill 2588, which requires reporting and assessment of toxic emissions at stationary sources and includes conservative state-established risk screening methodologies. The district recently reassessed Alon, San Joaquin Refining, and Tricor and determined they are not posing a significant risk. And Kern Oil is currently in the reassessment process. Next slide, please. As part of the Hotspots program, facilities are required to report their emissions to the district. And here's a portion of that data for the 4 Valley refineries. What we're showing here is the OEHHA top 18 recommended pollutants for monitoring and the pounds per year that are reported at each facility. The full inventory for each facility is available on our website on the workshop and hearings page, along with the materials for our April 26th workshop. Next slide, please. As previously stated, AB 1647 requires that the district take into consideration monitoring technological capabilities. One thing to consider is the type of air monitoring equipment available. The two main types are point monitors and open path. Point monitors are installed at a stationary location and measure concentrations of a pollutant at a single location. And open path monitoring systems use a light source and mirror, creating a path of light capable of measuring a pollutant that crosses the path. Both these systems are demonstrated in the image on this slide. It is important to consider the varying capabilities of different air monitoring equipment, including detection limits or whether the equipment has the capability to monitor a single pollutant or multiple pollutants. Some pollutants can only be measured through collecting samples and sending them to a lab for analysis, which means that monitoring of that pollutant cannot be done in real time. And certain pollutants may not have any monitoring methodology yet established. There are also varying maintenance requirements and a broad range of costs associated with different types of monitoring equipment. And now I will pass it on to Chai to go over the proposed amendments.
All right, thank you, Molly, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll be going over the proposed amendments, recognizing that there is variability among refineries and to be consistent with REMAR recommendations. The proposed approach will require site-specific analysis for each facility through a fence line air monitoring plan to yield useful air quality information. This is consistent and in cases more stringent than other air district approaches. So in general, the amendments will remove the exemption for the facilities that are not currently refining crude oil. All facilities that process petroleum, as described in SIC code 2911, will be subject to the rule. This includes 4 facilities in the valley. The list of pollutants to be monitored based on processing capacity will be removed. As a result, refineries will be required to monitor all OEHHA recommended pollutants plus ethylbenzene and xylene. And refineries will be required to submit their fence line air monitoring plan in accordance with the proposed Rule 4460 guidelines. In Rule 4460, a definition for the new guidelines will be added. The guidelines provide the framework that will be used to evaluate the fence line air monitoring plan, and we'll discuss this in more detail later. The amended rule will no longer have the exemption for refineries that are not currently engaged in refining crude oil. As a result, 2 facilities will be newly subject to the requirements of Rule 4460. Furthermore, the requirements based on refining capacity will be removed and replaced with a single comprehensive list. The list is shown on the right-hand side on this slide here and includes all the OEHHA recommended pollutants plus ethylbenzene and xylene. The rule will require that facilities provide in their plan sufficient justification for any compound to be excluded from monitoring. The air monitoring plan provided by the facility must be consistent with Rule 4460 guidelines. Additionally, refineries will be required to report to the district whenever a monitored pollutant is detected above established health thresholds. Along with the amended rule, there is also the proposed Rule 4460 guidelines. These guidelines contain the necessary elements in an air monitoring plan, including pollutants to be monitored, air monitoring technologies, quality assurance and quality control, data display, and notifications. It also requires facilities to provide sufficient justification for any compounds excluded from the monitoring system. For example, the compound may not be emitted, or the technology is not available to monitor or measure the compound, or the emissions are just below the detection limits. Refineries will also be required to consider any additional pollutants that are emitted. But at a minimum, refineries will be required to monitor for benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide. In addition to Rule 4460 and the guidelines, we're also proposing to amend Rule 3200, which covers fees. The proposed amendment will remove the exemption and associated provisions for refineries not currently engaged in refining crude oil. As a result of that change, 2 facilities in the valley will be newly subject to the fee requirements of Rule 3200. Once these rules are adopted, refineries must submit new or revised air monitoring plans within 6 months from the date of adoption. These plans will be made available for public review for 30 days before approval. If the plan is disapproved, the revised plan will be due within 30 days after notification of the disapproval. And once the plan is approved, facilities will have 365 days to fully implement the fence line air monitoring plan. So for next steps here, we will continue with the ongoing community engagement process. It's very important and essential in designing, implementing, and communicating air monitoring. We would also appreciate if you could provide comments on today's initial drafts by July 15th, next month. The final drafts will be made available for another 30-day public review. All comments will be welcomed through the date of the board hearing to adopt the rules and guidelines. So just a quick recap here, as you can see here with these circles here. We had a scoping meeting in February of this year. The first workshop was in April, and the second workshop here is today. And then the final proposed drafts and board hearing will be in the third quarter of this year. And so please send your questions or comments to Molly Boyette. Her contact information is shown here. And if you haven't already, you can sign up on our listserv to receive district updates and notifications on petroleum refineries. And that concludes our presentation, and we'll open the floor up to any comments or questions.
And just a reminder too, if you have a comment you want to send in or a question, you can also send it to webcast@valleyair.org email address. We'll be able to view that here and we can read that for everybody to hear if you send in your comment through that method as well.
Our first comment is from Gustavo.
Hi, Gustavo, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Good afternoon. I have a question, like clarifying question, if I may. First of all, thank you all for putting this together and presenting the information. I think I got most of it. Just a little confused on two pieces. One was for like the removal of the exemptions. Is it my understanding that there's 4 labeled refineries in the community, but only 2 would be subject to these to Rule 4460 and 3200 because they're currently processing or refining petroleum, and if so, then what is you guys as the air district, the one that permits these for the other 2 facilities, what is the current standing on those other 2 facilities that would be subject to these exemptions? And then the second part of my question, or I could take the answer to the first part.
Yeah, Gustavo, I can clarify that first part. Good question. So there are currently 4 refineries in the San Joaquin Valley, 2 that currently process crude oil and 2 that do not. So under the current rules that we have in place, the 2 that do not process crude oil are exempt. But with the changes, then the proposals that we are putting forth here, all 4 of those refineries would then fall under this rule, and so all 4 of them would have to implement fence line air monitoring plans.
Okay, and so that wouldn't exempt the 2, the Elan and the other one, the Tricor, right?
That's right. So under these amendments, both Alon and Tricor would be required to put in the fence line system.
Perfect. And then on the second part of the kind of clarifying question as well, was this list of 18 kind of candidates, chemicals, plus an addition of 2 that were in line for the project. But then there was a slide that said refineries at minimum have to require the monitoring, and there's like a group of like half a dozen. Can you clarify those 2 different groups and what they mean?
Yeah, thanks for that question too. So what we're proposing here is that in the fence line air monitoring plans, the facilities must account for those 18 OEHA recommended pollutants plus those 2 additional pollutants that were in addition to that ethylbenzene and xylene. So 20 total pollutants must be considered in the air monitoring plans. And a facility could make an argument to not monitor some of these if perhaps their facility does not emit that specific pollutant or it's at a low enough level. It may not be picked up by a monitor or there is no monitoring technology. There's a number of things they can consider and put in their fence line plan for justification. But what we're saying here is that at a minimum, those 6 core pollutants must be monitored no matter what. So H2S, SO2, and the 4 BTEX pollutants must be monitored in all fence line systems, even if arguments were made to not monitor the other ones.
Got it. And my last question, I thought I saw it, but I thought I have heard it at one point. But like the public notification system for this, aside from the website that currently exists, that I might add that is slightly difficult to navigate, especially on the mobile, on the computers, it's okay. But is similar to like the schools with the flag system, is there some kind of like direct communication that the refinery is thinking of or the district is thinking of to its community that sits, you know, catty corner to them, the Hilltop Fuller Acres community? Has that been something that has been proposed in either one of these rules?
So in our guidelines document, which the fence line air monitoring plans will need to closely follow as they're developed, there's some information in there about notification methods that the refineries can set up as a part of their fence line plans, whether it's through text notification, email, outreach. So that will be described in each facility's fence line air monitoring plan that they develop, and that will of course go through a public review and comment to see what thoughts or questions or ideas there could be to help inform that public process to make that data available. So our guideline document describes some of that, but it's the fence line plans that facilities produce that will describe it in more detail on what they're planning to make available.
Got it. Right on. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I have for now. I may have a comment, but I'll save it unless any other folks need to speak.
All right. Thanks, Gustavo.
Next to comment is Caesar.
Hi, Caesar. Go ahead.
Hello. I was hoping to get some clarification as to the limitations on monitoring as it pertains to fence line monitorings around the refineries, and whether or not there's going to be any type of monitoring in these frontline oil producing sites.
As far as the technology side for fence line, we're keeping it, and this can help answer another question. There's another question that came in through the webcast about what's the preferred method between point monitoring or open path sensors for fence line systems, kind of related to what you're asking. In the rule, the way it's proposed now is we keep it open for the refinery and the facility to think about what is the best method that could be used to monitor the pollutants that they're planning to include in their fence line plan, whether it's open path, point monitoring systems, both which can do a number of things. So that'll be detailed in their fence line plans. Some of the pollutants, there is monitoring equipment that can easily be obtained to measure those different pollutants. Other pollutants that are on the list, there either is no current monitoring technology or it's not available in real time. So there are some limitations there, some difficulties to measure some of those, but the facility is able to describe all that and talk about that in their fence line plans, which like we mentioned, will be open for public review as well. What was the other part of your question, Caesar?
Is this going to be just for refineries, or is this also going to be for other sites that produce oil and gas in neighborhoods, like just the wells?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, good question. So that the requirements of Assembly Bill 1647 is specific to refineries only, which are what these rules address here. So this whole process, this fence line air monitoring process, is specific to refineries.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that just a quick yes or no question that came up as you were answering the first one, because some of these need sampling and not there is no monitoring available, is there a need for sampling from the refineries, or it's just up to them for them to decide what's best?
Okay, yeah, good question, good point, and that can be addressed and detailed in the fence line plans that'll be forthcoming.
Next, we have Emma.
Hi, Emma, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma de la Rosa, and I'm the Regional Policy Manager with Leadership Council. We work with the community of Fuller Acres. Residents have, are the first to experience when there's the flares and to smell the emissions and breathe the emissions that come from the refinery, from the current oil refinery specifically. I wanted to support the comment that Gustavo made earlier about notifying the schools and including a notification, language into the rules to ensure that that is a requirement that the current oil refinery and other refineries have to comply with. In addition, the current requirement under the draft in 4460 is a little weak when it comes to when the data needs to be available. Currently, it says as soon as possible. We recommend and urge that language be changed to be at least a week or a month, but there should be a specific timeline that the refineries have to comply with. In addition to that, the information we know is currently available online, but that information is not available for folks who do not have access to the internet or to technology. So we do urge that refineries also be required to provide that information via mail, at least monthly, if not quarterly. And the requirement to inform the air district when they've passed the thresholds should also be extended to the community. The community specifically deserves the right to be informed when they have passed the thresholds. So in that text notification system that refineries can join, they should also be informing communities that they've passed the threshold. In addition, related to that specific text notification system, we urge that be a requirement and not an idea or a possibility. I think, again, if the air district does not require the refineries to have that public notification, then more than likely it's not going to happen, given that it does not happen at the moment. So we do urge that the air district require that public notification. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma.
Next up is Jesus.
Jesus, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesus Alonso. I'm the current community organizer for Clean Water Action and a lifelong resident of the Lamont community. So right down we're in the oil refining. And I really appreciate all the comments that have been shared so far, and would absolutely second Emma's comment that the text notification has to be required, and then have followed up with options of email, and then also for those who don't have the technology, be able to have that weekly or quarterly notification as well. The community, living here my entire life, those flares are frightening. When when we see that tower fire, we really don't know what to do. And so those notifications would be extremely helpful. And which is why I think that the text notification should be the minimum requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. Any comments on the Spanish interpretation line from what we see? And I'm looking at the webcast email again. I think we answered the one question. I don't see any other questions coming into the webcast at valier.org. Okay, and seeing no other comments, and we have one more comment. Okay, go ahead.
Next, we have Emma.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if I could go again, but thanks for the opportunity to say another question. You mentioned that the refineries have the ability to say which emissions they are not able to monitor because maybe the monitoring system is not available or the levels are too low. Could you provide an example of those emissions that are typically low for the refineries and the emissions that currently don't have a system that could monitor them? Please let me know if that didn't make sense so I can repeat.
No, yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Each piece of monitoring technology often has what's called a lower detection limit, where if the level of emissions in the atmosphere is below that, the monitor isn't even able to show a value because it's just so low. So there could be situations, and based on the facility's analysis and what they'll provide in their fence line plan, they could potentially justify that the emissions from their operations of specific pollutants are so low that the amount that would be in the atmosphere would be below a particular monitoring technology's lower detection limit. And in those cases, the monitor could be running in the fence line system, but it would never show a value because the emissions are just so low for that specific pollutant. So that would be specific on the type of monitoring technology, the type of pollutant that the facility is producing based on their operation. So that is an analysis each facility will have to consider if they want to put that in their fence line plan and make some justification. So that is where that would be described.
Next is Jasmine.
Hi, Jasmine, go ahead.
Martinez with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. And I did have a question too. You mentioned the exemption about refining or having crude oil. And the other kind of exemption that I wanted to talk a little bit more, get a little more information about is about the refining capacity piece. So I am aware that two of the refineries were able to monitor for less pollutants because of their refining capacity. And it seems like that may still be the case, and just curious about where that exemption lies.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, just to clarify that in the current version of Rule 4460, there is that delineation between monitoring requirements at the fence line based on the capacity of the facility. And what we're proposing in these amendments is that would completely go away. And every facility that refines crude oil or does not refine crude oil, if they fall under the SIC code 2911, which there are 4 facilities, they must all consider the same list of those 18 OEHHA pollutants plus ethyl benzene and xylene. So it's going to be the same requirements for all 4 of the refineries in the valley.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Definitely just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. And I think that's a great shift in the right direction for a lot of the communities that live near these refineries. And I do support a lot of the other comments that have been shared this evening as well. And one kind of area that I would like to know is what is kind of done with the data that is collected from the monitoring system. So that isn't something that I heard of today as a part of this presentation, and just would encourage the district to include it in the upcoming revision of the rule. We would personally like to see a root cause analysis being done that does engage in some sort of corrective action when these facilities do go over the threshold. So thinking beyond public notification, what are we doing to address the excessive emissions that are coming from these facilities, especially those that are contributing to our PM 2.5 federal non-attainment.
All right, thank you, Jasmine. And just wanted to note too, in the proposed amendments to the rule, there's a new provision being added where if the fence line system ever does exceed one of the thresholds, a comprehensive report must be provided to our compliance team, who can look at that closely and then take any action needed to make sure that whatever issues were going on to cause that higher level are taken care of, and to ensure it doesn't continue to happen. So that's a new provision in there to address some of those concerns.
Next to comment is Viviana.
Hi, Viviana, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask, do you guys really trust the refineries to be honest about self-monitoring?
Hi, Viviana. Thanks for that question. And we do. The fence line systems that they operate, they're comprehensive. The plans that they have to submit to us have to be detailed. Our inspectors are often at the facility to take a look at their operations. They'll have a close look at their fence line systems, how they operate, how they're being maintained. So we have a good eye on these operations, and a good relationship, watching closely what's happening at these facilities. So yes, we have confidence that the fence line systems are operating properly.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Genevieve.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a little late to this meeting, so apologies if this was already answered. But I know obviously there are large refineries in the South Coast and Bay Area, and they have to do this similar process. And I was wondering how fence line monitoring data in those districts are being released to the public, and how it compares to this plan.
Yeah, thanks, Genevieve. The approach we're taking here is fairly similar to what's been done in South Coast and Bay Area. The way the data is being presented is also going along the same line. So it's a pretty consistent approach with other larger districts across California. Okay, with that, we don't see any more comments, and there's no other comments on the webcast at valley.org. So I just wanted to wrap up the workshop this afternoon. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to our updates on the proposals, for all your comments and questions. If you can go back, Jai, go back a slide. Just wanted to remind you again, if you have any other comments on the draft rules we posted, the draft guidelines, we're asking that you can send in those comments by July 15th, in a few weeks, to give us time to think through all that and make any potential changes ahead of our 30-day public review of the final drafts before our board considers all of this. So please take a look. If you have any comments, questions, Molly Boyette is your point of contact. Please get in touch with her and let her know if you have any questions or comments along the way, and there's her contact there again. So thanks again for your time this afternoon, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.